in the early 1930s, of course, Twyford's were still in a very strong position. They'd been dominant almost in the sanitary ware world throughout the 20s. They'd survived the Great War. They'd survived the general strike and the coal strike. And in 1930, they were still in a fairly strong position to tackle the opportunities that were there. They were still making sanitary ware in the old way. In other words, they were casting and firing twice in bottle ovens, which was very, very, very different to what we do today. And in 1930, there was no Mr. Twyford. That was the biggest change to this company. It was run by a chap called James Webster and a man called Ernest Bailey, known to us all as Harry Bailey, a very, very well-known pottery firm. His wife was one of the Teapot Johnsons, actually, but that's just another sideline. In 1931 or thereabouts, the factory was on full-time. There were little problems. For a very rare occasion, they had actually had a wage dispute, but it was settled very amicably. It was one of the few times we've ever had one in this company, to my knowledge, and I've been here long enough. The things that changed quite radically, they started all the welfare arrangements that we now accept as a standard thing. We saw the first canteen during that time, and they had their first ever paid holidays during the 30s, which had never happened before. I used to watch the firemen starting an oven, and there'd be big, strong men, how I imagine blacksmiths always were. The water was running off the end of his nose, just as if there was a tap fixed in the top of his head. I couldn't believe that a man could perspire so much, and he used to have a huge jug, which he dipped into a wooden barrel and pour it over him. He was absolutely soaking wet. How the guy stood it all those years, I don't know, but he did. And that was just a way of life to him. He just seemed quite happy with it. You know, it just staggered me. Oh, he'd stay with the kiln for the best part of a week. Best part of a week, from the time they started firing to the time it was ready for opening up to see what they'd got. And of course they didn't really know what they'd got until they broke down the entrance and started carrying the bits and pieces out. And when we came to work in the mornings when I was a young wide-eyed lad, I used to love to go in the sorting warehouse, where it was all fun and everything was coming up and all the girls were singing and you could hear them tapping the ware and hear it all ringing. It's a sound, it epitomizes the pottery industry to me, the ringing of a metal scraper on the ware to see that it was sound. You still get that today, but not quite the same atmosphere somehow. The chairman and managing director then was this chap James Webster. He was quite a character in his own way. I didn't know him personally, but I've heard an awful lot about him. He was an Aberdonian Scot by birth, born of course in Peru. Where else? Where his father was building the railways, which the Scots always did everywhere in the world pretty well. When he came to Stoke-on-Trent, he followed almost inches behind Mr. Twyford, did everything he did, learned exactly what he did, and was the perfect replacement for Thomas Twyford when he took over on Thomas Twyford's death in 1921. James Webster also was involved with the Staffordshire Sentinel. He inherited the shares of Mr. Twyford, who of course started the Staffordshire Sentinel, and I think when it was bought out by the Rothermere group, Mr. Webster did extremely well, shall we say. He, I know, did an awful lot for the company by keeping it going during the 30s, which was a very, very difficult year. And he concentrated enormously on the export trade as well as the home trade. Almost 40% of Twyford's production was exported in the years just before the war.